right, so I know you missed the full camera video here. We are going to shift from those screen recordings to the longer videos for the rest of Unit 1 because I don't feel like there's as much that you need to see to understand. Whereas with some of those screenshots, it really helps to have the picture there. However, if you do prefer the shorter screen recordings, please let me know. So we want to talk about European life. Europe is dominated by hierarchical societies by the time we're talking about, where there's different class statuses. And depending on which status you are, you're going to get certain things or not get certain things. So authority in Europe comes from the top. Kings and princes, that monarchy, they are the top. And kings and the princes own the land. They conscript men for military service. And then everybody lives off the peasant labor. So if you're lucky, you can be conscripted for military service, and you're probably thinking like knights, stuff like that, which means you're a little bit higher than the peasants. Anybody wants to be higher than the peasants because the peasants are essentially the enslaved people of Europe. The monarchs, the kings, they are in charge, but the nobles who are under them, these are the ones that are almost as rich as the kings, but they're not the royal families. So the nobles have a lot of power. They are going to control the large estates where all of the peasant families live, and the peasant families have to answer to them. So your nobles are like your lords, which is where our word landlord comes from, right? The lord owns the land, and you rent your house on this land, and you pay something to him. Now, in our case, it's probably farming rather than actual money, because that's how things worked. But that's where landlord originally comes from, is the man who owns the land that you are allowed to live on in exchange for providing something to him. We talked about the matriarchal societies of the Northeast tribes very, very briefly, but it's important to note that in Europe, the societies are patriarchal, and a lot of them are defined by the teachings of the Christian church, which means that men control everything, including their children's lives. And we have this concept of primogenitor in Europe, which means, that's an important word just to know, primogenitor. This means that the firstborn son inherits all of the land. If you are a daughter, you're usually sold off for a dowry. Sorry, ladies. Most Europeans are peasants in the 1400s. It is very unlikely that you are going to be rich, and it's very hard to move out of that class. It is occasionally possible, but for the most part, it's very, very hard. And in Europe, life follows the seasons similar to the way it does to the Native American societies around the time periods of the same era. So, like I said, a lot of it is Christian-based. Christianity came to Europe through Jewish monotheism, and it became a reason to conquer other religions and people. We can usually trace this back to the Emperor Constantine in 312 when he goes out and conquers a bunch of people under the name of the church. The Roman Catholic Church is supposed to be the unifying institution of Western Europe. You have your kings, you have your nobles, but everybody is supposed to answer to the Pope. The Pope is above all, right? And then within the church, there's also a hierarchy. There's the Pope, and then there's the cardinals, the bishops, and the priests. It's a different hierarchy, but it's still a hierarchy. And the basic idea of Christianity in Europe is that the natural world is flawed, and spiritual power comes from outside of nature. It comes from a supreme being. It comes from this one divine God who sent his one divine Son, Jesus Christ, to suffer for humanity. And according to Christianity, Satan is also sent by God. He's an angel that was sent by God to tempt people with sin. And if you are spreading heresy, if you are teaching things that are not consistent with the Catholic Church, you are considered an agent of Satan. You have been tempted by sin and you have fallen prey to that, and you are an agent of Satan. Which means for men, you'll probably be excommunicated. For women, you'll probably be burned as a witch, unfortunately. So one big event that comes with the Christian expansion are the Crusades. And again, you guys don't really have a lot of experience with this because you've never taken a world history class. So I'm so sorry, because this deserves a lot more time than the less than 10 minutes that it's going to get. So the Crusades are a set of wars because the Christian rulers believed that their church and their religion are the only one. But we know that it came out of Judaism, so they can't be the only one, right? And Islam still is in existence as well. So the biggest threat to Christianity between 1000 to 1200 is Islam, and they have to work really hard to combat the spread of Islam. And so we have the Crusades. So between 1091 and 1291, Christian armies go out and wage what they call the Holy War, the Crusade, to reverse all these Muslim advances into Europe. And they want to take back the Holy Land where Christ had lived. Unfortunately, the Holy Land where Christ had lived for the Christians is also the Holy Land for the Jewish people and for the Islamic people. So everybody's got the same Holy Land, but we all have different gods and we all have this different person. So whose does it belong to? That is for somebody else to decide, not us, because this is not a world history class. Religious warfare here promotes Christian superiority, which leads us to the persecution of Jews and other minority religious groups, and that is a trend that will continue over time, as you will continue through your courses, through this course. An unintended advancement of the Crusades that you're not gonna expect me to say this, but is this discovery of sugar. And we get everybody addicted to sugar, and now we're gonna be rich. We're not, but they will. As they conquered territories that had already had sugar, they brought this white substance back to, I guess it might not have been white, it probably wasn't white, it was probably brown. They brought it back to Europe and they tried to raise it themselves. And if you know anything about sugar, you know it's definitely not going to be raised in Europe, but it is going to kick off something that we are going to need to raise the sugar ourselves, which we will talk about in a different video, because this is more religion focused rather than the future. So let's continue on our religious trend here for the next couple minutes. So in the meantime, with all this Christianity, we have smaller groups that are being split off. And we have these two men, Martin Luther and John Calvin, who are definitely going to challenge the Christian church. So in 1517, Martin Luther nails what are called the 95 Theses to a church in Germany, which is going to set off a new religion. Because Martin Luther and his 95 Theses argues that Christians should look to the Bible, not the church, as the ultimate authority. And if the church is using their powers to be the ultimate authority, you don't want people looking to the Bible. You don't want to be challenged with that. Martin Luther also translates the Bible into German from Latin so that now a lot more people can have access to its teachings. Because now if you don't know how to read Latin, but you can read German, you can still read the Bible. So while Martin Luther is doing this in Germany, John Calvin in Switzerland is establishing what we know today as the Protestant religion, which gives us the idea of predestination, which is this idea that like you can't save yourself because your life is predetermined. So you don't need to pay that tax to the church, because paying the tax to the church to get into heaven isn't going to save you, because your life is already predetermined. You're either going to heaven or hell, and no matter what you do, you cannot fix that. So you don't need to pay that church, which obviously doesn't go over well with the church. And so Luther and Calvin collectively end up setting up a war between the Holy Roman Empire and their own teachings. And this becomes known as the Protestant Reformation, because again, it's going against all these things that the Catholic Church has really been relying on to control society. And so in response, the Catholic Church comes up with the Counter-Reformation, where they decide that maybe it's time to look within their structures to change some topics and get more people on board with what Calvin and Luther are teaching, because they do need people to still want to be Catholic. And if you have these men who are encouraging you to join a different religion where things are a little less regulated, or you don't have to pay as much money, or they don't have the right to tell you what to do and you have more free will, people are going to start leaving the religion. And the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire cannot have that. So they are going to look within themselves to change some things, but a lot of it doesn't change right away. And again, Most of that is outside of what we're talking about because that's world history and this is APUSH.